I think it's quite fair to assume that we all understand that conflict exists basically everywhere, right? I mean, that beef that you have with the other student, that is conflict. On today's video, I want us to look at the differences between personal conflict, because there's something called personal conflict and work conflict, right? So I want us to look at the differences and also understand exactly what is this conflict, because if it is actually left unmanaged in the work environment especially, it can really hinder productivity. So do stick around. What is up, boys and girls? Welcome to TV Tutorials. My name is Doug and I am back. Yes, I am back. Let's get into the video. So, as I mentioned, I want us to be able to, by the end of this video, I want us to be able to differentiate exactly the core differences between personal and work conflict, right? We need to understand exactly what is it that sets these two things apart, because at the end of the day they are both conflicts, right? So before we get into that, we need to understand what is exactly conflict, right? So conflict in labor relations refers to disagreements or clashes between parties involved in employment, like employers, employees, and unions, often stemming from differences in interests or perceptions, right? So these conflicts can relate to issues like wages, work conditions, and collective bargaining, right? So in simple terms, if you look at a typical scenario in a work environment where maybe employee A does not get along with employee B for a particular reason, there's always obviously there's gonna be some sort of clash or disagreement between those two employees. You understand? So hence I mentioned earlier on that whatever conflict arises in the work environment, it needs to be managed, because think of employee A. Now, every time when employee A comes into work, there's employee B, and between those two employees, there's a disagreement. There's conflict, right? If it is left unmanaged, chances are employee A will spend most of his time maybe having that disagreement or that clash with employee B. You understand? So it needs to be managed, and it is done through something we call conflict management, right? So that is typical explanation of what is conflict. That disagreement, that clash, that difference in interest or perceptions, it is conflict. You understand? So I also mentioned that there's two different types of conflicts, right? We have personal conflict and we have work conflict, right? So personal conflict will be maybe an example where you are having a conflict with that other student that I mentioned earlier on. That is personal conflict. However, when you are in the work environment and maybe you are having some disagreement or clash with the next your colleague or your employer, it is conflict. It is actually work conflict, right? Because now it is in the work environment, right? So let's take a look at the differences between these two types of conflicts, right? So the first key difference is context, right? Personal conflicts occur in an individual's personal life outside of their professional or workplace environment, right? These conflicts involve interactions with family members, friends, neighbors, or acquaintances in non-work related situations, right? It doesn't need any explanation. If maybe I am having a disagreement with my brother or my sister or my family member or just a friend in the street, right? That would be what sets personal conflict apart from work conflict, is the fact that I am having conflict with someone who is not from my work environment. You understand? And then when it comes to conflict at work takes place within the professional or workplace setting, involving interactions and relationships between employees, employers, colleagues, or other individuals associated with the workplace, right? So whenever I now step into the work environment and I am having a disagreement with a particular individual, now it becomes work conflict, right? With personal conflict, it will be something that is outside of the workplace. With work conflict, it is something that is within the work environment. Those two terms are self-explanatory, right? So let's look at the next point, which is the source of conflict, right? So for personal conflict, Personal conflicts often stem from non-work related issues such as disagreements over personal values, lifestyle choices, family matters, friendships, or other aspects of one's personal life, right? And then if we look at conflict at work typically arises from issues related to employment, job responsibilities, work policies, interpersonal dynamics, work related decisions, or organizational matters, right? So if we go back to personal conflicts in terms of the source of conflict, we look at issues that literally give rise to the conflict, right? Maybe it would be your personal values or your lifestyle choices, your family matters, those things that would cause you to have conflict with that particular family member or that particular friend, right? So we are now looking at the source of the conflict. What is it that causes your personal conflict with that particular individual? Maybe might be that that other student spread rumors about you. You understand? Things like that, they can actually start conflict, and that is personal conflict. However, if you are in the work environment now, it maybe if employee B started spreading rumors about employee A, and then now there's a disagreement, that gives rise to conflict, right? So we need to understand the source of the conflict, right? So another point is the parties that are involved in that conflict, right? So remember, we're still looking at the differences between personal and work conflict, right? So the parties involved also sets a very key difference between these two. Let's look at the personal conflict side. For personal conflicts, it involves individuals in their personal capacities, including family members, friends, or individuals with whom one has a personal relationship outside of work, right? So basically, what that means is here I am right now with my friend, or here you are with that particular student, that other student you have a beef with, right? So when we look at parties involved, that is when now you come across instances where you would call your friends to back you up into this conflict. Now it speaks to who is involved in this conflict, right? You understand? Whether it is your family members, or your friends, or again that particular student. You understand? So the parties involved actually speaks to that. When we speak about personal conflict, we are talking about remember, people that are outside of your work environment. So that other party involved in the conflict would be someone that is outside of the work environment. That is the key difference between the two. Basically, it is that the other one is outside of the work environment, the other one is within the work environment. So even going as deep as looking at the parties that are involved, when you assess the conflict, you would find that the other party is not in the same work environment as the other party. That makes it a personal conflict. However, if both parties are within the same working environment, then it makes it a work conflict, right? So I also want us to look at another point, which is the resolution process, right? So with the resolution process, obviously it will be different. Remember, I mentioned earlier on that conflict needs to be managed, right? So when you sit down and you manage both these types of conflicts, it would be more or less different. You understand? So let's first look at personal conflict. Personal conflict, resolving personal conflicts often relies on informal methods, personal communications, self-reflection, or assistance from friends and family, right? So that is basically that the way that you would deem fit to resolve that particular conflict with someone who is outside of your work environment. It would be dealt with maybe in a informal way, or maybe through seeking advice from a friend or stuff like that. You understand? However, in the work environment, there would be what I talked about earlier on, conflict management or conflict resolution, right? So basically the employer would sit down both parties. It's an entire process. I'll just create another video explaining the whole conflict resolution process, right? So basically that's what happens. Your management will sit down and then implement this process to resolve the conflict between the employees. Keep in mind, it is happening within the work environment. That is how it is actually managed, you understand? And then another point that we are looking at today is the impact and consequences, right? So again, the impacts and the consequences of both these different types of conflicts, they are different. Personal conflicts can have emotional and psychological impacts. They usually have minimal direct impact on one's job or professional standing, right? Remember, this is all personal. You are outside of your work environment, so whatever consequences arises from the beef you have with the other student, it is not related to work at all. So that's what makes it personal, you understand? And in terms of conflict at work, uh, conflict at work can significantly affect job satisfaction, team dynamics, productivity, and career advancement. Unresolved work conflicts may lead to negative consequences within the professional sphere, including potential disciplinary actions or legal issues for the organization. You understand? So again, this is I mentioned it earlier on. I mentioned it earlier on to say that if conflict in the work environment is left unmanaged, if it is left unresolved, it is going to be a thorn. It is going to be a problem. You understand? It might affect productivity. It might affect the team dynamics of the organization. So it needs to be controlled. It needs to be managed, right? So that is what employees in the human resources department are tasked to do. You understand? So basically, in conclusion, we understand that personal conflict occurs with outside of the work environment, right? It is something that is directed to you as an individual. It is personal, right? And then when it occurs in the work environment, it becomes work conflict, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether the conflict is in the work environment or it is at home. It needs to be managed, and whatever methods you choose to resolve that conflict, it is a way of resolving the conflict, you understand? So the same principle applies in the work environment, that when there's a conflict between employees or an employee and an employer, it doesn't matter. Just as long as there's conflict within an organization, it has to be resolved, because it can be even be conflict within unions and maybe the employer, you understand? Those are still conflicts and they need to be managed. So that is that, Buffet. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you find this video very informative. If you are still watching this video and you haven't subscribed, come on now. Click on that subscribe button, click on that bell icon so that you get instant notifications. You do not want to miss out. All the links to our socials are right up here. Do make sure that you check that out, because you can communicate with us. Let us know which videos you want to see. We will make it happen. Anything other than that, Buffet, from myself and my team at TV Tutorials, yes.